The Boston Celtics are having such a good season right now, but there's some big news out of a conference rival that we're going to be talking about all on today's episode of Boston Balling. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, as always, to another episode of the show. I'm here with a special guest today who has had experience working with quite a few different sports teams and in different sports environments, but currently is at WEEI as a Celtics writer. I believe he does digital content as well. Justin Turpin, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on and for sitting down and taking the time to talk to me here. I definitely love to, follow your content and kind of see what you're doing. And you're definitely a very knowledgeable basketball person. So I'm excited to sit down and chat with you about this team that we have in front of us.
I know there's been a lot to like too, so that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but for starters, kind of before we dive into that, could you just kind of give a little bit of insight as to, what you're currently doing and how you landed this role that you're in?
Yes, I'm right now at WEI. I'm their Celtics writer. I also do some digital content, helping out with Red Sox stuff when needed, filling in with producing day parts whenever needed as well. So I actually graduate from the Connecticut School of Broadcasting right in Farmington,
Oh,
Connecticut. I
nice.
went there right
Yeah,
after
I
high school.
I live in Farmington.
Oh, really? Small
Yeah.
world. Yes, I graduated right there at Connecticut School of
Wow.
Broadcasting. Right, you're right familiar with it. Right, right near Nardelli's. That place is awesome.
Yep.
Um,
Right,
yep,
right near
graduated
me.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I graduated from there in 2020, and then came back home, applied at EI, and been there ever since. So I started off kind of doing production assistant stuff, and now I've kind of worked up to digital content. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I feel like, for people like us who are very passionate about these teams, like there's nothing better than feeling like you're working with the teams that you love or covering the teams that you love. Because I always say to people, like, I would watch games just for fun because that's what I wanted to do. Like, and now that you get to say, like, I get to cover some of my favorite teams is probably such a cool thing for you.
100%. It feels like you don't work a day, right? Because
Yeah.
you'd be doing it anyway. You'd be watching these games anyway, and now it's just you're analyzing a little bit more, and it's so much fun. So you definitely don't take it for granted, and I know I've loved every minute of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gotten, to interact with some other people who are at WEEI, and it just seems like a great environment over there. Lots of people who are really passionate about these teams and passionate about what they do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and everyone's great over there, great attitudes, and honestly, like everyone that I've talked to there, everyone I've had the experience of meeting, they're amazing, and they've all been great people to work with. So I've loved every minute of my time at EI.
That's awesome. I'm excited for you and excited to kind of see, what you continue to do, especially if the Celtics season continues to progress the way that it is. Last year, the way the season ended was definitely disappointing. They ran into a Heat team that was just playing unbelievably good basketball. And I think everybody, now fears playing Miami in the playoffs, especially when they have a coach who is just phenomenal at what he does. And it was just a tough way, for the season to end, especially after the way the Philly series ended and just all of the hype and momentum that went into that Eastern Conference Finals. And I just felt like it might have been the Celtics' year last year, but I still felt like there was something missing from last year's team. But watching this team now and, adding Porzingis and adding Holiday, those two additions I feel have been huge for this team and have just made such a difference in the way that they're playing this year versus how they looked last year.
100%. I think Porzingis especially kind of gives them an outlet that they never had. Like last year when the threes weren't falling, they didn't have a secondary option. It was really like it was live by the three, die by the three. And I think a lot of people get on Missoula often for that. But I think it's different this year. And there's been times where the three ball's gone cold and they've just started dumping it down low in the post to Porzingis. And it's just expanded their offense so much. And then on the defensive end where they lost touch last year on the defensive end. They were a top defensive team in the regular season. They really kind of slipped off in the playoffs. They had those lack of focuses. And I credit Jaylen Brown a lot for that. But Drew Holiday also kind of acts as a quarterback on that defense where he has a lot to say of what's going on, does a lot of communicating with Missoula. So I think these two additions of Holiday and Porzingis are exactly what Brad Stevens envisioned them to be. And so far, they've been a grand slam.
Yeah, and when it comes to Holiday, he kind of fell in the Celtics' laps because when the Bucks let him go, I was like, this would be a perfect addition for Boston. And then sure enough, Brad Stevens jumped right on it and got him because obviously when the Celtics moved Marcus Smart, that was tough as like a fan, like emotionally, because like obviously we've grown so attached to Marcus Smart as a fan base. Um, and defensively, I was like, we're going to miss that productivity of him on defense that he brought to this team. So, what is the Celtics' plan to replace that? And with where Smart is at in his career now, I feel like they kind of got an upgrade in Holiday on the defensive side of the ball now. And in terms of where the Celtics are at, it's looking more and more like it was a move that needed to happen because of the additions they were able to make without him being here.
Yeah, 100%. And if you look at it, like what a nightmare scenario for Milwaukee. Like you trade Drew Holiday, you have to have that kind of that shadow of doubt that he's going to somehow end up in Boston. And sure enough, he does. And I think you're right. It's a total upgrade for Marcus Smart. And that's not saying anything about against Marcus Smart, but I don't think people realize and understand just how good Drew Holiday is. He's a 5-time all defensive player. He's a 2-time all-star. This guy is such a good two-way player. And I also think that he kind of understands his role a little bit more than Marcus did. And that's, again, no, we all love Marcus Smart, but I think at times he would force things down the stretch where Drew Holiday doesn't do that. Drew Holiday understands his role a little bit better than Marcus Smart did. So I think the addition of Drew Holiday might go underappreciated a little bit. Like I know people love Drew Holiday, but it's just got overshadowed a little bit because of how good Porzingis has been. But I mean, those two, like I said, have just been a grand slam.
Yeah, I feel like also just their contributions have helped the Jays to elevate their games a lot too. Because I mean, Jalen Brown, especially, he's had a phenomenal season so far, especially after, signing that big extension and coming into this season. Like, I'm ready to, live up to that contract. And people saying, the Celtics overpaid him. Like, they shouldn't be, paying for a guy like that who just constantly commits turnovers and just is super inconsistent in the postseason. But I almost feel like he's playing at a different level this year. And Tatum looks just so much more comfortable and just more confident out there. And I just feel like this group that they have right now has helped elevate those two to the point where they really are playing their best basketball, like overall.
Yeah, and I think they've both taken incredible leaps. I think Tatum kind of utilizing that post game, but I look at Jalen Brown. This is the best basketball he's played in his career on
Oh,
both
yeah.
sides of the ball. I mean, he has just been tremendous, and he's been one of the most scrutinized players in recent Boston sports memory. Even when he was announced, when Wick Grossbeck announced the pick at some season pick ticket holder draft night, they booed the pick. They
Yeah.
booed
They
the
did.
pick before they really even knew much about him. So it's like
Yeah.
he's always just been scrutinized, and I get it. Like when you turn the ball over 8 times after Tatum goes down in a game 7, like yes, you kind of earn some of it. But I think some of it was overblown. Like there was no question he is a super max player, and it is just a brilliant idea that they gave it to him. They didn't have an option, to be honest. Like it would have been such a mistake to break up that duo, and Brad Stevens and Celtics front office and ownership are just too smart to do that. So they knew they were going to give Jalen that contract. I know it kind of took a little bit longer than people thought, but there was no doubt that he was going to get that deal, and it's paid off. I mean, what he's done on both sides of the ball is just tremendous. And in terms of Jason Tatum, that post game has really helped elevate his game, and he's also been a great defender. But I look at that post game as really an outlet for him where, when he's not knocking down his shots, we're not really seeing him settle for those threes anymore. He'll start getting downhill a little bit more. And I credit Sam Cassell for that. Another offseason addition on the bench as an assistant coach. I mean, that guy's one of the top assistants in the league, and you brought him in, and now he's done wonders on Jason Tatum. So every offseason, every move they made this offseason, from signing JB to bringing in Holiday and Porzingis to revamping the coaching staff. I mean, you could not have had a better offseason for this team.
No, I mean, Brad Stevens just continues to put forth a bunch of W's, in my opinion, with
For
like,
sure.
just him being in this role. I just love him in this position. And he just is definitely very knowledgeable and aware about what this team needs. And people like to kind of rip apart Missoula on Twitter, and I've seen people saying, get rid of Joe Missoula, but I think from a coaching standpoint, he's come a long way this year too. He's, managing his timeouts a little bit better than he did last year. His rotations are a little bit less questionable than I'd say they were last year. And you mentioned this before. I do think a lot of that has to do with the coaching staff around him because they brought in some experienced guys around him who have proven track records of success to help elevate him as well as a head coach. And I feel like, last year there were some growing pains there, obviously, which is natural when there's a coaching adjustment, especially, after that whole controversy prior to Missoula becoming the head coach. And it's just like that was a lot for probably the players to take in too. And I expected there to be an adjustment period. And then obviously in the playoffs, he ultimately went up against a much more experienced head coach than he was in the postseason. And now he has that experience and he's going up, against other coaches who, yes, are talented too, but now he can say he has that experience with this Celtics team of going to the Eastern Conference Finals. So hopefully he can kind of apply what he learned, and that coaching staff around him, I think, has been not talked about really as much as it should be, as I think, a direct factor in the Celtics' success this year.
Yeah, and I also when it comes to Joe, I don't think people realize the position that he was put into last year and how difficult that is. Like you're coming off an NBA Finals berth, your first one in almost it was over a decade, your first Finals trip, and you finally get over that hump. And then 4 days before training camp, your coach is suspended indefinitely, and there's kind of a lot of secrets there, right? Nobody really knows what actually happened, players including. And I know Ime talked about it last week where he said that whoever needed to know knew, but there was a lot of secrets, and it was such a weird time right before the season. And for Missoula to step in as the youngest coach in the league at that time, step in and do what he did with that team doesn't get enough credit. I think it's easy to kind of jump on him, especially when the team is this talented. Unfortunately, the coach is always going to get the blame because you have too many stars to blame, if that makes sense. So you're never going to the coach is always going to get the blame, no matter how you slice that. That's how it's going to be this year too. If they don't win the finals, it's all going to be Joe's fault. No matter what he does, he could do his best job, but it's all going to be because that's how people see it. It's always going to fall on the coach. And I think something similar happened there in Milwaukee. But what he did last year was impressive. And what he's done this year is even more impressive because he finally had a year to kind of, adjust. Like he got a year to prepare a whole offseason. He knew what he was going into. Like when you're thrown in a week before training camp, that's difficult. And then you're kind of inheriting a coaching staff left behind by Ime. They lost Will Hardy over the offseason. He took the job with the Jazz. They didn't fill his spot. So you're already down a coach. And then you lose Damon Stoudemire in March because he takes a head coaching gig in college. It's like there was just so much brain drain on that coaching staff, and they did a great job. And Joe always talks highly of those guys. But in terms of the situation he was in, like that's a near impossible place to succeed, except you had that much talent. That's why he was able to do it. But on any other team, there's no way he does what he did. And that really speaks to him as a head coach.
Exactly. Yeah. I, really like Joe. I do definitely think the players connect well with him, and he's a guy who they would want to stick around. And like you said, this feels like it should be the year. It feels like they have a lot of the pieces. And one thing I definitely wanted to, bring up is just the productivity they've been getting from the bench. I think, this bench was a little bit of a concern heading into the season. Like, where's the productivity going to come from? Obviously, with losing the former sixth man of the year to then going to, a bench full of guys like Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, Luke Cornett, guys who, showed glimpses of being able to be productive, but haven't really been able to fully shape into the players that they can be on this team. And I give credit to those guys. Like, Peyton Pritchard has really shaped into a very solid role player off the bench for this team. And I think that's also been another thing that's been huge this year is some of these guys have stepped up, I think, more than people expected them to.
100%. And I think it's easy to kind of forget that Pritchard wanted out last year. He wasn't in the rotation. So it's kind of hard to put that much faith in a guy, but Brad Stevens and Celtics front office and the coaching staff did, and it's paid off because him and Hauser have been two of the most impactful bench players in the league. They're both top 5 and plus minus off the bench, and they're doing it like I know they're mostly known for sharpshooter, but like they're doing it affecting the game in other ways. Like how the Hauser's defense is getting a lot more attention than it did last year. And Pritchard's just as good defensively, and he's an also terrific offensive rebounder. So I think they're affecting the games in a different way. And in order for the Celtics to be as successful as they have been, them two in particular needed to take a big jump. Hauser was going to see an increased role off the bench. Pritchard was obviously going to see an increased role. He found his way out of the rotation last year. And the way those guys have responded is just phenomenal. And they're a big reason why the Celtics are where they are. And Luke Cornett's another one where he stepped up whenever called upon, done a terrific job. Even like they called them the Stay Ready group. And I think, it's not a shot at them because really every NBA team calls it the Stay Ready group. So really they don't have a cool nickname like last year's Bus One boys. But all of them, once called upon, have brought impactful minutes. And what this bench has done shouldn't go unrecognized in their record because they're a driving force to their success this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you look at all of the pieces to the puzzle here, this Celtics team very much feels more complete than I've felt about them in a long time. You feel like are connecting all the dots here between the bench and the starters. And, even Derek White. I mean, the game that he's played this year too, he's just been absolutely phenomenal. Like I've always been a Derek White fan. And I'll never forget that trade to this day because like look how much he's done for the Celtics here. And I just feel like from a confidence standpoint, he's just playing like so much more of a leader this year on the court, and he's just been so good with playmaking and kind of making things happen out there, and he just really does it all. Like that's something I really like about him is he just makes everything happen.
He makes the winning plays is exactly what he does on both sides of the ball too. He has the most blocks amongst guards this season. He's a terrific defender. I mean, we already knew that about him, but his scoring's really taking a big jump. And it's funny because everyone else on the team has really saw their averages dip a little bit. Derek White's the only one averaging career highs across the board, and now he's an all-star candidate. And he actually even made the player pool for potentially representing Team USA. So I love that he's finally getting the attention he deserves because, like, we saw it. And I think the easy one to point to is Game 6 last year in the Eastern Conference Finals when he forced a Game 7. He was the inbounder on that play. And
I'll
he
never
crashed from the
forget
corner
that.
and tipped that in. Like, that's insane. And that's just the kind of hustle that he embodies. And there's been times this year where it's kind of like, this is your guy. Like you kind of want him taking shots down the stretch now. It's like, wouldn't would you think that? But he's been terrific and he's been a perfect fit.
Yeah, he's somebody who like I'll be watching a game and towards the end if I want somebody to have the ball to take that big shot, a lot of times I'm finding myself saying I want that to be Derek White because it happens so often when the Celtics need like a big 3 or just a big bucket in general. He's that guy that's coming up and making that shot. It happens so often now that it's like he's the one I trust in those types of situations to take the shot, and I just think that's been absolutely great for him.
Yeah, he's done it to the Raptors twice this year, 2 corner threes, 2 game winners. He actually has the most points in clutch time by any Celtics this year too. So that's impressive when you're probably the 4th option. I would say Holiday's the 5th, White's the 4, and then 1, 2, 3 are interchangeable in any given night between Tatum, Brown, and Porzingis. But like your 4th option is your top clutch scorer. Like that says a lot about him and the talent you have.
Yeah, I really don't trust Tatum as much as I trust him in those, late game situations where they need a huge bucket because Tatum doesn't always hit those types of shots. Like I'm finding myself actually wanting Derek White to take those shots more than him.
I'd like to just see the Celtics get a little bit more creative when it comes to those shots, right? I feel like it's
Yeah.
sometimes like it's just kind of rushing, trying to get Tatum the ball. And if it doesn't work, then there's really no other side plan. Like I want them to get a little bit more creative, like utilize the talent you have, use Tatum as kind of a decoy, whatever it may be. But like get a little bit more creative there. Cause like there's been a couple of times this year, where it's just kind of been Tatum right around the free throw line. It's like, all right, here we go again.
We've seen this before.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's just definitely a lot of talent on this team, like you've mentioned, but obviously, the trade deadline is quickly approaching here. What is big thing that you feel like you'd like to see the Celtics do at the trade deadline? Because for me, bench depth is definitely something still that I think they should be prioritizing heading into this deadline.
It's funny. I actually wrote a piece the other day for EI.com. The one thing I want them to do is absolutely nothing. I think they've done their job. I think at this point, adding could be subtracting when it comes to this team. It's so hard to get a whole roster to buy into the idea of sacrifice. And really, that's been a pillar of the Celtics' success this season, that everyone's kind of bought into that. And the bench that they have now, like, I get there's what comes to the postseason, right? Like, there's Al Horford's 37. Kristaps Porzingis has injury history. So like the concern and the want for more bench is totally reasonable. But the reality is there's no replacing those guys, especially with the resources the Celtics have to work with. Like, you only have about 6.2 million. Is it really worth moving any of your pieces right now when they've proven to be like perfectly fine? Like, your bench has won you a couple of games this season. So I think Brad Stevens, when he talked earlier this month, kind of hinted at it too, that there will be deadline inactivity. He kept saying that the person could even be in the building already. And my thought is it's O'Shea Brissett, because he was looking for a bigger wing. But I think even Neemias Queta has been great in the minutes that he's gotten. And my one thing would be do nothing and just convert him to a standard deal, because with him being on a two-way, he wouldn't be able to play in the postseason. But I just think, like, where you're at right now and how connected this team is, adding is subtracting. It's just not worth it. Roll with the team you got, because most likely whoever you bring in isn't going to crack your playoff rotation anyway.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the way that Brad Stevens kind of thinks about that, because I did see, a report, and I put report lightly here because there's so many conflicting reports that are out there. But I saw a report saying, that Brad Stevens plans to be aggressive when it comes to seeking out bench help. But at the same time, I feel like he's a very strategic guy. Like, he's not going to make a move just for the sake of bringing somebody in here. I think he'll only do it if he feels like it's somebody who makes sense for what the Celtics are trying to do. And it also depends, obviously, on, what you have to give up to get that player. Is it a player worth the package that is being asked for from, whoever you're executing that trade with? So I feel like he is going to have some conversations. I don't think he'll just sit around and do nothing. I think he'll be, having conversations with people, but it's probably not to the extent of like, I'm looking at this as a must do. It's more like, yes, it's a bonus if we can kind of acquire someone else off the bench. But the question is, how important is that? And only if it's the right situation type thing.
Yeah, especially when you have a team with like the talent the Celtics have. Like, everyone knows that it's really a championship or bust this year is how everyone's looking at it. So of course you're going to do your due diligence when it comes to the trade deadline, and of course you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't, right? If you're just kind of
Yeah.
you're going to take the calls. Like, Drew Holiday comes available, right? That was their big splash, though. They're not going to have a big splash, but like, Drew Holiday comes available. You would never think that guy comes available, but of course you're going to reach out and you never know what really happened. So that's just kind of an example. But just given their resources, it's not going to be a big splash. But of course, he is going to do his due diligence. If there is a player that he feels can make an impact that will kind of fit into the ethos of this team and fit into the character, then he'll do it. But I just think that's such a slim list. And a lot of these times, I think financially, it's going to be tough to make work. So I hope he does his due diligence, and Brad's going to do his due diligence. Like, you can
Yeah.
guarantee
Right.
that he's going to do it. So he's going to do it, but he's not going to make a trade just to make a trade, like you said.
Yeah. No, it needs to make sense for what this team is trying to do. And if he doesn't feel like anything makes sense, then he probably won't do anything. But yeah, like you said, I mean, the injury history with Porzingis is definitely something that is a bit of a concern. But overall, it hasn't been a huge issue this season so far. He's been able to, play in a lot of games, and obviously when he's out there, it's huge for the Celtics team. But one of the teams in the Eastern Conference that early on in the season people were talking about being a threat to the Celtics is the Milwaukee Bucks, with, what they've done during the offseason. And as expected, though, they've had a pretty horrendous defense. And, sure enough, when you give up a really strong defensive asset in Holiday, it's kind of to be expected that your defense would degress and not be as good as they were previously. So now, they made a coaching change, a very abrupt coaching change by letting go of first year head coach Adrian Griffin, bringing in Doc Rivers, who, has a pretty rough track record in the postseason. So obviously there was something going on there behind the scenes that just people don't really know. And who knows if we're going to find out like exactly what the context of that was, but that whole thing just happened really quickly. So if you're looking at Milwaukee now, how do you feel about, them stacking up against the Celtics come playoff time? Because when I've, you know, seen them go up against each other this season, the Celtics still feel like a significantly more complete team to me, whether they have a new coach in there to, help them out or not. It still doesn't really change how I feel about the Celtics being in a better position than them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they have a better roster, and I don't think it's really questionable. I think the Celtics have a way better roster. And, for Doc Rivers, too, taking this job just feels like a lose-lose. Like the team's 30-13. Like, what exactly is going to be doing your job? Like, what exactly is going to be turning things around? Like, if it's championship or bust, you want to bring in Doc Rivers, who, as you alluded to, has already had his playoff struggles. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, in my eyes, that's just a lose-lose for Doc because he's going to have to fall on the sword now. And they still have to go through the Celtics, and the talent in the Eastern Conference is just so stacked right now. Like you look at the Pacers, I know they haven't won since they got Siakam, but Halliburton's been missing some time, so Halliburton comes back. The Knicks have been red hot since the new year. Miami just getting Terry Rozier. It's like the talent in the Eastern Conference is just so much where I do think it will be Celtics and Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think those two teams are the most talented. But when it comes to how they match up, like nothing's changed in my mind. I still think the Celtics are the better team, and when it comes to a 7-game series, would beat Milwaukee.
Yeah, what's tough for Doc Rivers is, I mean, he's coming into a situation where it kind of is sending the message that they feel like they're in championship or bust mode right now, because why else would they make that abrupt of a coaching change after, this guy's been in here and they've been, winning games and they have a pretty good record. And obviously, their record doesn't necessarily speak to all the problems there because, like we mentioned, the defense, and they've just played some really close games and barely squeaked out some wins. But you have to wonder if Giannis or Dame like had some sort of say in like this whole coaching situation, because to me I was like, where did this come from? Like I did not expect this to happen. And if they were of the mindset of we feel like we want to win a championship this year, then why even take the chance on a first year head coach in the first place if you don't feel like that's the guy that's going to get you that immediate championship right now? That part still doesn't make sense to me.
You had Mike Budenholzer, who had already won a
Yeah.
championship, and you get rid of him for a first-year coach. It doesn't make sense to me. And I know we talked about the Celtics possibly being in win now mode, but like the Bucks are, they have to be. Damian
Literally.
Lillard's an aging player. They traded a bag for him. Giannis has not been quiet about his desire to win. And if that involves leaving Milwaukee, he'll do it. I mean, he made that clear over the offseason. I know he signed that extension, but like there's no sure thing that Giannis will stick around if they can't win. And that's all he wants to do. He just wants to win. And you bring in Dame, like this is it. Like they are in win now mode. And I think it's a great point. Like, why would you bring in a first year unestablished coach? And Adrian Griffin's been on the sideline for 15 years, has been an assistant. But when you want to win now, wouldn't you bring in the established coach now? And there were plenty on the market in the offseason. And I think like you had one with Budenholzer. I don't know why you move on from him. I know you get a first round exit, but like that Miami Heat team ended up going to the NBA Finals, and you
Mhm.
played them without Giannis. And when Giannis came back, he was a shell of himself. So that whole thing made no sense to me. I appreciate the aggressiveness and the willingness to make changes and go all in by ownership, but in a way, it kind of feels like they're hurting themselves. And when you look at it, like it's been a nightmare scenario for that ownership this since their offseason. Like you get Dame, you bring in Adrian Griffin. It's like none of it works. But when you get Dame, like you lose Drew Holiday in the process, and he ends up with the Celtics, like we talked about. So really, nothing's gone their way the way they've expected. Like Dave's been great, but you lost Holiday. They knew they were going to trade Holiday, but their thought were he was staying in the Western Conference. Like there was no way he's going to wind up with the Celtics, right? And he does. So it's been a tough go for the Milwaukee Bucks since the offseason.
Yeah, I think they were 100% banking on him not going to Boston. I think obviously they would have been kind of dumb to not think it was a possibility that he would come here, but I think it's more they were just really hoping that it wouldn't happen. And then it did happen and they were like, "Oh, well crap, like that's like our worst nightmare coming true now." And I almost feel like they're kind of like taking a little bit of a step back by bringing in Doc because yes, Doc has a lot of coaching experience, and maybe they feel like experience is what's needed when it comes to postseason time and going up against a team like Boston. And from a coaching standpoint, maybe they feel like he can help them, push past that and just how good of a team the Celtics are. But like, I kind of feel like they were in a good spot. Like I feel like they would have still been, regardless of if they have Adrian Griffin or Doc Rivers, I still felt like they were a team that was capable of going to the Eastern Conference Finals anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure, and it does kind of feel like a step backwards because now you're restarting everything. You just
Yeah.
went through 43 games with one coach, and now you're going to bring in Doc, and this is no easy task for him. And no matter how talented the roster is, there's clearly some dysfunction. If what just happened with Adrian Griffin just happened, like that speaks to the dysfunction within this locker room right now. And then you're coming in midway through a season with a team with championship aspirations. It's really championship or bust, like we've been talking. It just doesn't make any sense. Like it had to get that bad, and there were some red flags where even when they came to Boston, like Adrian Griffin tried to take out Giannis, he said no, kind of screamed at him on the sideline, and Griffin put him back in. So there were some red flags, and that was back in November. So that was a little while ago, and there's certainly been some since then, but it feels like a backward step for them because now you have to restart. And the way the Eastern Conference is going, I know the Celtics kind of have a few game lead on the top, but right now, but like the Sixers are right there, the Heat are going to start pushing. So it's just so tight. It just doesn't make sense to me to make that move.
Yeah, no, it really doesn't. And, I think Milwaukee ultimately will end up kind of staying on the same track that they're on. Like, I don't see them really dipping down too much, but there is going to be an adjustment period involved, like midway through the season when you're switching coaches. But to me, it's like, it just doesn't like make sense really. I'm just like I'm just very confused as to why they think that's gonna make the situation better for them. And if it was lack of experience, and they just shouldn't have even brought in Griffin in the first place if that was the case. So I'm like a little, puzzled by that. But I'm like a diehard UConn basketball fan because I grew up super close to the UConn campus, and I love to see my guy Andre Jackson like getting his minutes in Milwaukee. So I hope this doesn't affect, his minutes or like allows him to, not be able to play as much just because of, Doc's vision when he comes in.
Well, when Doc comes in, I think he's going to have a short leash. Not No, the whole team's gonna have a short leash. I mean, poor
Yeah.
Doc might come in, watch Damian Lillard play one possession defense and retire for good because I don't know if Doc's gonna do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'll be an interesting situation for them, and, even so, though, I still think it's very telling how good the Celtics really are, that they are at the top of the Eastern Conference with that few game lead because it's such a tough competitive conference, those top, few teams that really anybody, if they go on a hot streak, could end up at the top. And the Celtics, having that undefeated home streak for so long helped with that for sure. And then they lose their first game at home against a team that I kind of expected might have a chance to hand them their first home loss. A team that just has a lot of hype around them right now, just after just winning the whole thing last year. And, when it comes to take out the Eastern Conference for a sec, say the Celtics, get past the Eastern Conference and they go to the finals again this year, are the Nuggets the team that you are most concerned about the Celtics having to go up against in the West as of right now?
I think they have to be, right? They're the reigning champs, and their duo is just as deadly as yours. And that's
Yep.
really why you lost that game, because Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic outplayed Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown.
Yeah.
So I think they have to be right now. I think the second closest would be the Thunder just because how talented they are, but they're too young right now. I think like they have to have that playoff loss, which you see most of the time in the NBA. A lot of these teams will make it to the Western Conference, Eastern Conference Finals, whatever it may be, and then drop, and then they learn from that. And I think that's kind of a stage that Oklahoma City's going to have to go through. Like you look at the Suns, they're still kind of can't get out of their own way. So I think right now Denver has to be the team that you got your eyes on. And their duo is just as good as yours, and they've been there too. I think when the team's been
Yeah.
there, that aspect gets overlooked at sometimes, right? Like they won it all last year, and like this team has shown they are capable. And until someone knocks them off, they are the champs. So I think the Celtics could hang with them. They proved that. And it really, the Celtics had plenty of chances to win that game. They outshot them
Yeah,
on the
I was getting
perimeter. Like,
so frustrated. I was
how,
like,
like,
just seeing the number of opportunities that they
it
could have
was
won that game and they didn't. I
insane.
was like, "Come on." Like,
You had like you won the turnover battle, you scored more points off the turnovers, you scored more points in the paint, you outshot them on the free throw line, and you outshot them on the 3-point line, and you still lost. I don't know how that happens, but like that's what happens when your stars didn't show up. And that's gonna happen. It's inevitable across an 82 game slate. Like and
yeah.
a lot of people kind of might get on Tatum and Brown. They don't show up for the big games. I mean, they've proven they do. They're 6-2 in game sevens, whatever it may be. So they
People
do
are
get up for
dramatic
them.
sometimes
It's
about it.
people want to win, like especially like recently, like we were supposed spoiled for 20 years, and now the Celtics kind of give you that best chance to get back in the streets of Boston and have a parade. So people want it. I don't blame them. They're hungry for it, but sometimes they can't ignore the facts.
Yeah, as Boston sports fans, we're like, wait, it's been too long since one of our teams won a championship now because we got so used to like constantly having somebody win something. And now we're just like, wait, what are
Exactly.
we supposed to do now? Like, because obviously, the Patriots, they had a rough season. The Red Sox, who knows what's going to happen with them? I've had plenty of opportunities on Locked On Red Sox to talk about them. And I mean, the Bruins are good again, too, but I do worry a little bit about, like the youth on that team, like if come postseason time, they're going to be able to step up in the big moments. So the Celtics to me right now feel like the team with the best chance. And it's interesting you bring up experience because that's something that I even emphasized, like, when they were in the finals last time against the Warriors. And I'm like, look at this Warriors team and how many times they've done this and just like how used to being in this type of setting some of these guys are compared to these Celtics players who at the time hadn't had that experience of being in the finals. And that's something that can be huge, especially mentally when you're going into those types of games. And ultimately, the Warriors just had more experience than the Celtics. And that's something, like you said, that I think 100% gets overlooked when you're looking at matchups when it gets to that big of a series.
Yeah, 100%. And I think especially moving forward towards the playoffs, like now the Celtics have been there. Like they've experienced plenty of heartbreak. Like they know what it takes to get there. And I think that's one of the hardest things is people kind of looks at like, oh, your team's that loaded. Like you should make it to the NBA finals. There's no such thing as that. Like the season is far too long. There's so much that goes into it beyond the X's and O's. Like having that mental focus for even a full 48 minutes of a game is a lot. It's a challenging, task. And that's what something the Celtics lost last year, right? Because last year they lost their focus. They could stay focused for the 48 minutes, and that's what plagued them in the postseason. That's why they went excessively long. They shouldn't have gone that long with the Atlanta Hawks. They shouldn't have gone to 7 with the Sixers, and they damn sure shouldn't have fell down 0-3 to the Heat, but they kind of lost their focus. And so that's something that they learned. And I think that's kind of Missoula, especially like learn from that last year. The word he's been preaching all year is mindset. Their goal is to win every game, every day, every practice, whatever it may be. And they just take it like that. And I think that goes a long way. And that's part of the lessons you learn along the way of failure. And I think now that they've been there and they've kind of experienced that sour taste, I think they're ready to make that jump.
And you can tell that Tatum and Brown are just hungry this year. there's that mentality of like, we want this year and we want to win it all. And I think the group they have around them now is a group that truly can get them there. People are really understanding of what their roles are. And those two, you can just tell, are just ready to just take on anybody because they absolutely want it this year. And you can see that in their play.
And I think on their bench, like if you look at some of their offseason additions this year, right? Sam Cassell has been in the league. He's won a championship. Drew Holiday has won a championship. I think the wisdom and the experience that those guys have is going to go a long way, where they know what it takes to get there. They know how to, and they're vocal guys, and they know how to, navigate through the ebbs and flows. It's inevitable. It's an 82 game slate. Like it's going to happen, especially in the postseason. That's like its own season in its own. So
Yeah.
them having that resources were going to go a long way for the Celtics, especially when you factor in like they've had people from the '08 teams hanging around. Evan Turner was behind the bench. I know he never won a finals, but he knows he's been in the league. So they just have unlimited resources this year, and it feels like this has to be the year.
It really does. Yeah. I mean, like you said, obviously there's going to be bad games, bad losses. Like when they went on the road to play the Warriors, that was just one of the worst games of the season this year. And then that game against Milwaukee where they just couldn't make any shots for a good portion of the game. I was like, what are we doing here? Like, this is crazy. So, like, you're going to have, outliers like that. But something that I've really noticed that's different about this team is they're closing out games a lot better than they did last year. And they're actually winning close games that last year's team would blow at the end and not actually be able to win. And that to me is a big reason why I feel like they're different this year.
And I look a lot of that towards Porzingis. I think what he brings to them, like they have so much more in the clutch now because they can get so creative with Porzingis. Like his work as a screener, his work as a floor spacer, it just goes so far. And he's just done wonders for their clutch offense. Like when things aren't going well, like we talked about earlier, they just don't settle for the three. They'll dump down to Porzingis, let him back down. He'll find someone cutting, whatever it may be. Just what he does. He's such a smart basketball player, and it's just completely reinvented their clutch time offense. So I give a lot of credit to Porzingis for that.
Yeah, it's actually funny because my fiance is a big Wizards fan, the poor guy.
Oh, poor guy. Yeah, poor guy.
And so he was very disappointed when that whole situation unfolded, and he's like, why would we let go of Porzingis? Like, we were on a good track. Like, we had this talent between, like, him and Kuzma, and I thought we were building something here, and then now we're just like not, because we're going backwards like always because we're the Wizards. And it was just so funny that he just like went off on like this big rant about it. And now when I'm watching Celtics games and Porzingis is just like going off, he's sitting there like this could have been us. Like, of course, he's now playing better basketball because he's in a Celtics uniform.
Oh, that poor guy having to watch that Wizards team. And like Porzingis had one of the best years of his career last year. They finally might have it. Like he's got the opt-in that he's going to make all this money. Like he's sticking around. No, he's coming here. At least he gets
That's what he thought. He was like, I just don't understand. Like he was like, I thought that like he was excited for this upcoming season with him being on the team.
Well, he got Mike Muscala, so that was, and he's not even there anymore. So poor guy.
I was like, enjoy him. Yeah, I know. It's just the life of being a Wizards fan, though. He's like, I'm just used to this type of stuff year after year.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Like I said, we were spoiled for so long. We're so long. I couldn't imagine.
I know. I have really high hopes for this though, this season. So if you're looking at everything at the end of the day now when it's all said and done, like, what is your prediction for the finals? Are you thinking it's going to be Celtics Nuggets?
I do. Yes, I still think that I wrote that in my big preseason prediction. I had Celtics Nuggets, and I still stand by that. I think the Nuggets are the best team in the West right now, and I think those top teams are just too young. We're starting to see Minnesota fade off a little bit, where they're dropping down a little bit. We talked about Oklahoma City. They're super talented, but they are babies. They're the second youngest team in the NBA. I just can't see it happening out of them. So I think Denver represents the West. And when it comes to the Celtics, I mean, these guys aren't even at their full potential yet. They're still figuring each other out, and they're undeniably the best team in the league right now. So they've given you every reason to believe in them. So I do think it will be Celtics Nuggets.
Yeah, no, me too. I like that prediction. I'm with you on it. Hopefully the Celtics can figure that out and figure out how to take on that team over there, because that's a tough team to have to face in the finals, especially like you said, because they just won it all. So they're going to be hungry again. They want to go back to back, and it's the Celtics are going to have to, really turn things up a notch when they head into this postseason portion, because that's a tough team to face.
And if
100%.
it's
That's like
anything like
evenly
last
matched
Friday,
game.
it's gonna be a lot of fun. If it's anything like last Friday, that'll be a lot of fun. It's fitting that that game actually fell on National Popcorn Day because it gave us plenty to be excited about.
Actually, yeah, I know. I mean, I was so frustrated though. I was like, come on, you had opportunities and you couldn't close this out. Like, come on.
Which is honestly, it's a good thing, right? Because it's one of those games that you can learn from. Like if they came in and they kind of waxed them off the floor, it would have been a different story. But like I said earlier, like they dominated the margins. Like in reality is when you dominate the margins in basketball, you're typically going to win the game. And that's a reason. That's the reason Joe Mazzulla, every time he takes to the podium, takes a look at that game sheet right in front of him, and he'll check out those margins because that really tells the story. And they dominated them. So I think there is a lot that you can take away from that game, a lot of positives. And there's not going to be many nights that the Tatum and Brown shoot combined the way they did. It's just not going to happen much. So I think the Nuggets are certainly a scary team. It's not a team they're going to run over, but the Celtics can definitely compete with them. And we saw that last Friday.
Yeah, no, it would be a really fun series, 100%, like a very competitive series. I feel like the NBA needs those two teams because that would just be lots of fun and a lot of back and forth probably for what could very possibly end up being a 7-game series, which would be
I
fun.
think so. Yeah, I would lean 6. I do think the Celtics get it done in 6. I don't know if I trust them in 7 as much as like they've
No.
improved and stuff. It's just I've seen it too many times with this team. So let's wrap it up in 6. Let's just
Yeah,
do it
right.
in
And then we
6.
don't have to worry about that.
Please, please.
But Justin, this was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate you hopping on here and talking some Celtics with me.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Everybody definitely check out Justin's content for WEEI. And what is your Twitter handle? So in case people want to follow you there.
Yeah, at Justin M. Turpin.
Easy enough.
Yep, simple enough.
You got it, everyone. So hit that follow button. Definitely check out his content if you don't already. Thanks so much as always for tuning in to the show. I look forward to hopefully bringing you some more happy Celtics conversations as we progress through the rest of this season. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week, and I will catch you all next time. Take care.